happy about having to use things like Miralax to help your child to go to the bathroom on a regular basis. Whether or not you know much about Miralax, you more than likely know that it's probably not a good idea to have to give your child a medicine to help them to do something their body should naturally do. But if you don't know much about Miralax, what you do need to know is that Miralax has a lot of documented side effects. Things like problems with emotional regulation, focus and attention issues, behavior problems, so on and so on and so on. So parents, in this video, what we're going to talk about is number one, the dangers of Miralax. But number two, if you have a child that is struggling with chronic constipation, we want to give you resources so that you can know what we do to help the kids in our practice to overcome constipation naturally. Because the great thing is, mom and dad, there are real, very effective and safe ways to help your child to overcome constipation naturally that don't require putting them on a long-term medicine like Miralax. So that's going to be our goal. We're going to spend some time talking today about how we do this, because the value that I want you to take from this video is that we've worked with lots of kids with constipation successfully, helped them to overcome chronic constipation when other things have failed. And I'm going to give you the exact things that we need to evaluate and the exact things that we do to help them here in this video. Now, I'm going to ask you a favor. If this video gives you value, please share it and like this video, because we would love to make sure that the parents who need to hear this message get this. The only way that we can increase our circulation is by you sharing and spreading the message so that we can get this word out. Now, let's talk about a couple of really important things. First and foremost, the biggest issue that we find is occurring with most kids that deal with chronic constipation is brain to gut and gut to brain signaling. Because interestingly enough, right, if you think about this in the right logical order, the way that the body is designed is to eat and make a bowel movement. And when it works the way that it's supposed to, it's occurring because the nervous system is working with the messages going up from the intestines and back down from the brain saying it's time to go to the bathroom, right? The intestines get food in, they start to get full, they send a message up the spinal cord, the brain receives that, and it sends a message back down that says, empty out, once the food has been absorbed and used for its purposes. When it doesn't happen, then we have to understand that there are a number of different reasons that this can occur. And so let's talk kind of top down. So when we look at the way the brain is designed, the brain runs the show through what is called the autonomic nervous system, which is composed of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is composed primarily of a thing called the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve, if you've watched any of our prior videos, is the single most important nerve in the body, and that's why we talk about this so much. Because the vagus nerve's role in brain development, emotional regulation, focus and attention, sensory input, motor coordination, and motility is tremendous. It is the main coordinator of all of those functions. So for the brain to be able to work the way that it's supposed to, that nerve and those pathways have to be connecting at 100%. Otherwise, there's going to be problems with motility, plus lots of other things. Now, if you have a child that has been dealing with constipation, you're probably saying, well, number one, why is my kid constipated? And if you've already gone down the road of looking for pathologies and looking for lesions and impaction and torque in the intestines and all of the things that potentially can be going wrong, and all of these tests have come back clear, and you're left with nothing but questions. Well, let's talk about this. What we have found is that the vast majority of the cases of kids that come through our door with chronic constipation, there are a few things that we know are present. Number one, the child's nervous system very likely has shifted over onto the stress division of the nervous system. And I want you to understand why this matters. Because when the nervous system is balanced, parasympathetic on and active, sympathetic calm but available, fight or flight system, right? Because you shouldn't be stuck in stress mode. When that happens, children make normal bowel movements in the vast majority of cases. But what we find is that the vast majority of kids that are coming in with chronic constipation, when we do our assessments, their nervous system is pretty darn stressed out. Lots of stress output from the sympathetic nervous system, but too little vagal tone. So these two systems are supposed to work harmoniously. The vagus nerve is what is going to coordinate the movement of food through the intestines so that when a child eats, after a period of time, they'll digest the food, make a bowel movement, and rinse and repeat on a daily basis. But when the nervous system has something that is a stressor that is so great the body can't shut it off, whether it is a physical or an emotional or a chemical stressor, then the sympathetic nervous system will slow down or stop motility altogether. So when you're using Miralax, you are trying to stimulate the bowel to make a bowel movement because you increase the amount of hydration in the intestines using the ethylene glycol, which is Miralax. But the problem is that the body doesn't want to do this because it's not a natural phenomenon. So you're essentially forcing it. But the body has a mechanism by how it's supposed to work, which is the food comes in, the vagus nerve kicks on, food passes through in a predictable manner. So let's address the real problem. The real problem is that if the fight or flight nervous system is overly active, it's going to suppress the ability of motility to occur in a natural sequence. Now, when we talked about the stressors before, I want you to understand that we understand that these things have this effect because neuroscience tells us this. When the nervous system gets into a state of fight or flight, this protection response is working in a very predictable manner, right? It's the same thing like if you think about a bear, right? If you're, out in the woods and a bear jumps out at you, you're not going to stop and take a poop, right? You're going to run, you're going to flee, you're going to try and protect yourself and your family because that's the way the nervous system is designed. You're going to run and run and run, and you're not going to think about things like stopping and going to the bathroom. You're not going to care if you get sick. You're not going to care about being logical. You're only going to care about getting as far away from that bear as fast as you can and being safe. And then when the stress is over and you've eluded the bear, then your body can start to calm down. And then your body's natural processes for healing and maintenance can kick back in because the stress is over. And that's the way the system is supposed to work. But what we have found in the vast majority of the cases that we work with is that there are big stressors that get into children's nervous systems, oftentimes very early. Moms and dads, realistically, usually before most of us could ever conceive of our kids having stressors in the nervous system. And I'm going to define this for you because I want you to understand what this means. When I say stressor, we're not talking about being stressed out like we are as adults, right? Where we've got so many things in the air and we're juggling and there's a million different life things. No. Stressors can be chemical, can be physical, can be emotional. They can be all different types. But they can occur in ways that we oftentimes are not aware. And let me explain. So if you have a stressful pregnancy, mom, the stress that you're under, believe it or not, has been shown in the research to have an impact on the baby. And this isn't your fault when I say this. So I just want you to understand that this is not a blame game. If you're stressed out during your pregnancy, the stress hormones that you're producing, they cross the placenta. And your child's nervous system that should be in parasympathetic mode and rest and digest mode as you're getting in the latter stages of the pregnancy may have an overly active sympathetic nervous system. And that overly active sympathetic nervous system can begin even in utero to affect some of these normal processes the body is supposed to be developing. Then, if you add on the layer of birth intervention, which, no secret here, moms and dads, this is a big thing, right? Birth interventions are really and truly the biggest and most significant catalyst to children having neurological, motility, and neurodevelopmental challenges that exist. More and more research is coming out about this every day. I would encourage you to go and start Googling this. Start looking at the effect of birth interventions on neurodevelopment. And what you'll find is that study after study after study is starting to look at this and say, birth process is the catalyst. And then there is a perfect storm that starts to brew within a child's nervous system that begins to affect multiple different areas of a child's quality of life, right? In the case of a child that develops constipation, now you've got the potential for emotional stress in utero. Then you also have a major league physical stress of birth intervention. And if you're not familiar with birth interventions, moms and dads, that's okay. Like, I want to explain to you why this is a big deal. Because if you're listening to this and you're hearing this message for the first time, I want you to understand that even in an easy delivery, there's still a level of force that can affect the way that your child's brain is communicating and connecting to the body and can create a stress response. Because what you need to understand is that when a child goes through a standard birth process, there is force, traction, and torque that goes into the base of the skull and this area of their neck. The first 3 or 4 inches of it, which is called the brainstem, is where all of these really important structures that regulate our vagus nerve and our stress responses and our ability to send the messages back and forth to the GI, but also to control things like draining of our inner ears and our sinuses, controlling the messages coming up from the spinal cord to our brain. All of those structures live there. And so we have found in our research, and also what we found in all the research studies that are being done, this is the primary area that is the trigger to many kids having issues with motility, but ADHD, sensory processing, and so many other things, because this area controls all of those things. And so when a child goes through a traumatic birth process, that is the area that has been pointed to as the starting point to all these stressors. Because guess what? The vagus nerve comes right off of the brainstem. If you draw a line right here to right here, the vagus nerve comes down, and it comes down and it controls the esophagus. It controls drainage of the inner ear and the sinuses. It controls my heart rate, my lungs and my breathing. It controls my stomach and all motility in my stomach. It controls my intestines, my kidneys, my adrenal glands. It controls literally every major internal organ and system. And when there is a stress to my brainstem region here because there is an injury, minor or major, what it essentially does is it shuts down the ability of the messages to go back and forth from my organs to my brain. And so now we have got affected signaling. And when that occurs, my vagus nerve can't send the messages back and forth to tell me that it's time to poop. And I want you to understand this because, if you are looking for solutions for your child and you've kind of run out of options, I want you to understand that it may sound kind of simplistic in some manners, that if we fix the child's nervous system by adjusting, then things will start to reboot. But I want you to understand it's complex because there's lots of neurological things that have happened inside of your child that have led to this point where they're chronically constipated. Because it's like a tipping point, right? Once the stress gets in, if we don't pretty rapidly get the child's nervous system out of stress, it starts to wire into stress mode. It learns it. And learning stress mode becomes really challenging for a child's body to get out of. That's where, when we start working with kids that deal with chronic constipation, part of the process that we have to go through is we have to do an in-depth understanding, an in-depth history of what was pregnancy like, what was birth process like, what was neurodevelopment like, did they hit their milestones on time, what were they like behaviorally, how were they emotionally, how long have we been struggling with constipation, what have you tried? Because all of these things now start to contribute to the stress the child's going through, and they increase the level of stress the child's under. And then you start adding in chemical compounds like Miralax that we also know alter the nervous system and have these effects on a child's brain. Then what we see is that there is this confounding effect where they start to snowball down a mountain, getting faster and faster and faster, leading to bigger and bigger issues with constipation because the child's nervous system has just been constantly stressed out and it can't ever do anything to break the cycle. So before we even talk about a care plan, we have to have lots of data. And then we have to be able to look at scans so that we can see what is going on. When I say scans, moms and dads, we use these things in our practice called insight neural scans. Probably the best thing that you'll ever see when it comes to understanding what is going on within your child. And I'll show you a set of scans here in a couple of minutes. But you have to understand that if your child's nervous system has been going down this road for a long period of time, the stress is accumulated and in a lot of ways wired into their brain and how they operate. And so the way that you have to unwind that is you have to understand how big of a fight you are up for. Okay. So when you talk about a child that's been dealing with constipation for years, it's a bigger journey. You've got more work to do. You've got more wiring to change within a child's nervous system than a child that's had it for 6 months. So these two journeys are going to be significantly different. And the things that we're going to have to do to support the child are going to be entirely different. So let's talk about a couple of different things here that I think are going to be important for you. Number one, I want you to understand that when you have a child that's been constipated, you've tried all these things, the long-term way that you're going to fix this is you've got to get the vagus nerve on. It's got to stay on. And we have to train the nervous system to now be able to keep it on all the time and not regress once you complete a care plan. Okay. And so I'm going to show you something here so you can have an understanding of what we look at when we evaluate our patients. I'm going to pull up one of our thermal scans. And moms and dads, if you've never seen these scans before, A thermal scan gives us a really clear picture of what is happening with a child's autonomic nervous system and what is coming out from their brain. Because ultimately, if we see that the brain is sending messages down that are incorrect to a child's spinal cord, it's indications of what is called dysautonomia. It's dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system or dysfunction with the vagus. So let me share my screen with you here so you can see what these scans look like. So this is a thermal scan. And if you look on this image, what you'll see is that there are areas of discoloration, and you're going to see that there are patterns where they cluster. And what I mean by that is that if you look on the scan, you see the areas where it turns green, and you see the areas where it turns red, and there's these white areas that start to cluster around them. When we look at these areas where we see that there are these clumps and clusters, those are areas of what are called regional dysautonomia. Those are areas where the nervous system is having a hard time with regulating blood flow to the nerves that come from the spinal cord. Now, the area that you see at the top, see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the cervical spine. When you see that, those are the areas where the vagus nerve lives. But when you get into the lower cervicals, those are the areas where the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system also begins. So there is a lot of activity and a lot of imbalance in these regions. And when the sympathetic nervous system is kicked up, it is going to suppress the ability of the vagus nerve to tell a child's brain to poop. Come down a little further, you see the next area, T9, where it's elevated. So T8, 9, 10, they are all elevated, they are all above normal. That is the area where the adrenal glands live. So when we are in stress mode, when stress is stuck in our nervous system, we use the adrenal glands as a secondary stress response. So if we're stressed, what will happen is that the stress response from the brain will also trigger our pituitary gland to tell our adrenal glands to kick on. And we put out hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. If you've ever heard the term adrenaline rush, well, whenever we have a rush of adrenaline into our system, what it will do is it will activate our body-wide fight or flight response. But here's the thing you need to understand. When you start seeing this on a scan, what you're seeing is a loop. If we are in stress in the nervous system and we are getting an activity reading on these thermal scans from the adrenals, what you're seeing is a cycle that the vagus nerve is being suppressed because the nervous system, the fight or flight response is kicked up so much that it's increasing the amount of activity of the adrenals, and one feeds the other. Because once you start getting adrenaline to increase, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it gets into the brain, and it actually makes it easier for the brain to become stressed. And so until we start changing this by activating the vagus, this loop will continue automatically on its own over and over and over and over again every day until something breaks the cycle. I hope this makes sense. Moms and dads, if you're keeping up with me on this stuff, do me a favor, let me know in the comments. If you have questions, please post them and I will make sure to make individual videos for each and every one of you so that we can address your concerns. Now, let's come down a little bit further and you see the red bars, the large red bars down at L5S1. Now, what I want you to understand is that that area is also the region where the nerves directly go into the bowel so that you can make a bowel movement. These nerves control things like the colon. So we see that there is a big interference pattern there as well. So we've got patterns of stress, we've got patterns of interference, and this tells us that if you were talking about a perfect storm of things, this child's nervous system is perfectly suited to be constipated because the fight or flight system is overly active and the nerves that go into the bowel are also interfered with. Hope this makes sense, moms and dads. I'd like to share with you another image. So when you look at this next set of scans here, what we see is a little bit different pattern, but we see a lot of activity up here at the area where the vagus nerve lives. And so this is another example of a dysautonomia. So there's a lot of imbalance. And one thing I want to point out is that you see that these bars here are blue and red. So when you see the white bars, so those typically are considered to be less than 1 standard deviation above normal. Those blue bars, those are 2 standard deviations above normal. Those red bars are 3. So those are really high activity levels. When you get down into the range here where you see T5 and T6 on this graph, those are the areas where the stomach live. So when you get into understanding how the spine organizes and what the nervous system works like, T4, 5, and 6 are the nerves that typically are what are called motor control for the stomach. And so we see a pattern here of dysautonomia around the stomach. And this is actually a really common pattern to see with kids too, that also have a lot of issues with reflux. So you'll look at this and you say, okay, so there's definitely a possibility of some issues with the stomach, maybe some stomach upsets, maybe some reflux issues that could have been present from a very, very, very young age. You also come down a little further and you see another pattern coming through at T9. And so we're seeing that same loop. Adrenal glands overly active, sensitizing the brain, keeping it in a state of fight or flight. So I hope this makes sense. So when we look at these types of scans, it really gives us a very clear picture of what needs to be done. We've got to begin adjusting those areas that are showing this increased activity, calm them down, reconnect the brain, activate the vagus so that the central nervous system can start getting the messages back and forth so that this child can start going to the bathroom. Now, what I want to explain to you, moms and dads, is that when we work with cases like this, if you're wondering how do we do this, well, once we have this data, then what we need to do is we need to develop a care plan putting all the data together. The child's history, we have to look at the scans and see how far off the scans are, and then it allows us to develop a frequency and a duration of a care plan. Now, let me give you an example here so you have an idea as to what a care plan typically looks like. So there's a little boy named AJ. And so when AJ came in originally for his care plan, this is a little dude that it was probably the most severe constipation case that we've ever had. This was a little boy that on the regular was having fecal extractions performed. His mom and dad, his mom, who was a nurse, had had him in for 3 or 4 fecal extractions when we met him. And he'd been constipated quite literally since birth. We met him when he was 6. And he had been on Miralax. He had been on multiple different types of suppositories. They tried magnesium, probiotics, prebiotics, fiber, you name it, quite literally everything. So all of these things had failed. He'd been to multiple specialists. They had scans done, you name it, he had had it done from an evaluation standpoint. But nobody could ever tell mom why he was so constipated. So let me give you a piece of his history. Mom had a very difficult labor and delivery and an incredibly stressful pregnancy. There was a lot of family stress. Parents didn't exactly get along very well with the in-laws, and it created a tremendous amount of emotional stress. And it led to mom being super stressed out throughout the entire pregnancy. And then she had a cesarean section, which also was assisted by a vacuum. Now, let me boil that down. The intervention itself of a cesarean section creates a lot of force on a baby's neck. So a normal cesarean section is going to be between 40 and 60 pounds of axial traction, which means pulling and twisting on the baby's cervical spine, kind of like a car wheel. Now, that by itself can cause a pretty substantial amount of injury to a baby's neck. When you add in a vacuum extractor, that takes the force to potentially as high as 80 to 100 pounds on a baby's neck. Now envision this with me, right? You've got a newborn who's got a suction cup on their head like a plunger, and they're pulling with about 100 pounds force. Okay, can you envision with me there is a possibility for injury to this child's neck? Of course, even if there was not a tissue tear, even if there was not a nerve that was ripped, there was going to be an injury like if you and I had a whiplash. This poor little dude held his head up right after he was born. He could not breastfeed. He was a miserable little baby. I mean, just cried all the time. So, which, as time progressed, they started noticing that he had substantial delays. He was way behind verbally, way behind with motor control. And you could see when he came in, right? Poor communication. He was way behind in speech. He was way behind in motor control. He was way behind cognitively. All these things were snowballing. So, and all of these things were things that were potentially, right, directly correlated to his birth process because of the trauma that he went through and the stress that mom was going through during the pregnancy. Now, what ended up happening is that when we started caring for AJ, okay, his care plan was set up at 3 adjustments a week for a period of 48 visits or 4 months, with a scan every 12th visit to monitor for change, to make sure that what we were doing was working. And here is what happened. By the time that AJ had hit visit 12, he had already started to make bowel movements on his own. For the first time in his whole entire life, he had started to make bowel movements. So what ended up happening after that is that he got to a point where he started going every 3rd day. And by the time he's hitting the end of month 2, he's going every other day. By the time he's hitting the end of month 4, he's going every day or darn near every day on schedule, and mom is no longer having to use any Miralax or any other type of tool to support his GI. He's going to the bathroom on his own. And by the way, he is better communicating verbally. He is showing improved cognitive function. He's showing better motor control. He's doing things from a motor planning standpoint that he'd never done before. All these just amazing byproducts of helping to get his brain and his nervous system to start to function the way that it's supposed to. Guys, that's the beauty of pediatric chiropractic. Like, I know that it seems almost overly simplistic, but when we adjust a child in the way that a pediatric neurologically focused chiropractor does, and you understand what their nervous system can handle, it's amazing because you're going to see changes that are oftentimes unexpected and unpredictable, but you're going to see things change within a child's nervous system that can be sometimes just amazing. And so for him, right, the biggest goal, number one, was getting him pooping, and which we did. He started pooping very quickly, and he's been able to maintain that even when we've transitioned him into wellness care, which has been amazing. But what's even better is that he has had continuous, nonstop, massive improvements in cognitive function. And that's what's the really cool part, is that came in for one thing, but the bigger picture was that this little dude's nervous system continued to get better and better and better, because the underlying issue is that his little nervous system was so stressed out, it stunted his autonomics from working the way that it should, but it stopped his brain from developing the way that it should. And that's why once we started adjusting him and monitoring the way that his brain was responding, he's had nothing but massive improvements ever since. Now, moms and dads, I know that many of you may have questions. If you do, I would encourage you to, number one, go to our website, so elitefamilychiros.com, and check out the articles that we have posted on our blog. There's also a great research site that you can go to, which is pxdocs.com. There are lots of great additional research articles, lots of patient case studies, lots of great additional tools. And if you're outside of our geographic area, you can also find pediatric chiropractors that would be able to serve you in your area. If you have additional questions, feel free to DM us. If you're watching this on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, go ahead and throw a message down, and we'll be more than happy to get back to you. If you want to contact us directly, you can go to our website, elitefamilychiros.com, and you can send us a message. You can contact us at info@elitefamilychiros.com as well, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. But more importantly, I would ask that you share this message with as many people as you can, because if this is giving you value, giving you hope, maybe giving you a different direction, and you want to get your child off of Miralax permanently, and you want to stop the cycle of searching, hopefully this will help you to understand that there are other, safer, more effective ways to help your child than having them on Miralax for the rest of their life and dealing with all the nasty side effects that it creates. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.